Hello my lovelies, I'm Zoe Lundgren at Scandinotions and welcome to the sewing tutorial for the Moonstone Handbag. My free downloadable PDF pattern for all bag makers gives you instructions for making the moonstone from quilting cotton, which makes it perfect for sewists who are looking to sew their first ever bag project. Now it is a free pattern and I would so appreciate it if you would consider please subscribing to my channel. It's an amazing way to show your support for my small business and you know I appreciate you, right? Okay, back to the Moonstone. Now the brilliant thing about the Moonstone handbag is that you can customise it to whatever level of bag making skills you think you already have, or you can use it as a skills building project. For example, the Moonstone doesn't need any hardware, although there are plenty of opportunities to add as little or as much hardware as you like. If you want to include a fastener, the pattern shows you how to install a hook and loop tape, and I'll link in the description below to a couple of my tutorials for other types of fasteners that you can install if you like. And if you aren't a beginner bag maker, there are so many ways for my more experienced bag making lovelies to hack this pattern. Take a look at these. These are some of the bags that my lovely testing team came up with. They've used cotton canvas, cork, vinyl and even leather for their moonstones. Some team members adjusted panel sizes so that they could incorporate picture panels and self-made textiles. They also lengthened the handles so that they could wear their moonstone as a shoulder bag or a crossbody bag. And finally, I want to show you this one. This one has been scaled up to 120% compared to 100%. I've shortened the handles because it's mine and I prefer a hand carry bag. I have added some purse feet. This vinyl at the bottom is very stiff and the vinyl at the top is very buttery really. I've added a twist lock which goes from the back to the front of the bag, and I've made my straps feature straps and set them with some rivets. So you can see there's plenty of opportunities to hack this bag and add so much hardware if you want to. Have you been inspired? Go grab your favourite fabric and let's go sew it. So a quick run through the pattern pieces you're going to need. There are only 4 and you can either print the pieces or you can cut it out from the measurements in the cutting chart. Go grab the pattern, it's a PDF form, easy to download on my website, link in the description below. You'll need 2 exterior main panels, which are your exterior fabric, and each of those will be fused to the wrong side with fusible fleece. There will be an exterior base panel. You'll need 2 of these cut in your exterior accent fabric, and both of them will have fusible fleece fused to the wrong sides. Lining panel, 2 of those, and each of them will be fused with medium weight woven interfacing to the wrong sides. And finally, you'll have 2 handles, which will be from the accent fabric, and on the wrong sides of those you'll have fused the medium weight woven interfacing also. We'll first take out our exterior main panel pieces and we'll transfer the fastener placement marking onto the top of our exterior panels, or there are instructions in the pattern if you haven't printed off your pieces. I've made little marks here which you can't see, so I've just made them with a little pin so they're more obvious. Instructions are included in the pattern to attach these pieces of hook and loop tape. But if you want to see my tutorials for installing magnetic snaps or twist locks, go have a look at my tutorials which I've linked in the description box. When it comes to attaching your hook and loop tape, it might be a little bit difficult to hold them in place. They're like a kind of nylon and they're quite slippy, so they're a bit tricky. What I suggest is put in a tiny bit of either glue or double-sided tape in the centre, but make sure that they're not within 1/4 of an inch of the edge because you don't want to get it in your needle when you're sewing along. And then position the centre of your hook and loop tape over the fastener placement markings. There we go, I'll take out my pins now. Then I can top stitch these in place 1/8 of an inch from each of the edges. The next thing to prepare will be our handle pieces. With the wrong side up, you want to turn each of the short ends over by 1/2 inch and press. We'll do this on both ends. And then we're going to fold it lengthways, right sides together, making sure that the short ends are still folded over by 1/2 inch. Then we open it out and fold each of the raw edges in towards the crease. So first we'll do one side and then the other, and press that in place. Make sure that your ends are nice and tidy. It's one side, turn it around and do the other side. Making sure that both short ends are still folded wrong sides together. We're going to fold on all those creases we've just made, and then we're going to bring these two outer folded sides together so that they are nice and level, and all the way along they sit nice and level, and we'll clip all of that in place. And when you've done that, just make sure that there are no raw edges poking out at the short ends. Then we can take it over to the sewing machine and top stitch it 1/8 of an inch away from the edge all the way around using a 3mm stitch length. And then repeat for the second handle. And then we can bring back in one of our exterior main panels and one of our pattern piece 2 exterior base panels. And we're going to lie the top of the base panel along the bottom of the exterior panel, right sides together. Clip it in place, and then we can take it over to the sewing machine and sew it together with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and a 2.5mm stitch length. And don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and end. When that's stitched in place, we'll turn it to the wrong side and then open out the seam and give it a nice press from the wrong side. And making sure that the seam is still open, I like to give it a nice little press from the front as well. And as a nice touch, why not do a top stitch 1/8 of an inch from either side of this seam. Now, top stitching is a very personal preference, so I suggest that you take some of the offcuts of your fabric, fuse them with the fleece stabiliser and practice top stitching on there, and when you've got the stitch length that you prefer, go with it. But don't be scared by it. And we'll repeat all that for the second exterior main panel and base panel pieces. And remember, the top stitching is optional. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. Your bag will still look great because you made it. Now both front and back panels are done, we can join them together by placing them right sides together and making sure that all the edges, around the edges, are aligned. And then we'll clip together the bottom edge. Then we can take it to the sewing machine, sew it together with a 1cm seam allowance using a 2.5mm stitch length. Then open up your panels, turn over to the wrong side, open up your seam at the base which you've just sewn and press it open from the wrong side. Then I'm going to take this to the machine and top stitch 1/8 of an inch on either side of the seam using a pretty top stitch length, which for my machine is about 3.5 to 4. When you've assembled your edges along the base edge, you want to fold your bag right sides together and align the outside edges. Pin the sides together or clip the sides together and sew them together using a 2.5mm stitch length and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then we're going to open out the seams and press from the wrong side. So I can really get into my bag and press these seams out, I'm using a mini ironing board, but if you don't have one, you can use a rolled up t-shirt or piece of clothing, it will work equally well. So when we've pressed out our seams, we can top stitch them if we want to. It is quite tricky, and it gets more and more tricky the thicker your fabric is. It's not necessary, but I have included it for this pattern because I think it just looks pretty if you're confident in your top stitching. If you're not, you can leave it out, that works. So next we need to join these corners. So still with the right sides of the bag together, we will, from the bottom of the bag, pull the corners with our fingers, just pull the corners of the hole outwards and put the seams together, the raw edges together. Make sure that this seam is perfectly lined up with this seam. Clip it in place. Then we'll take it over to the machine, and again we'll use a 2.5mm stitch length and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And when we've done that, we'll do exactly the same to close the second corner. When you've closed both of the holes, trim the seam allowance at the corners to 1/4 of an inch. Then we can go ahead and set aside the exterior for now. Then we'll bring out our lining pieces, place them right sides together, clip or pin along the side seams and sew them together with a 2.5mm stitch length and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So when the sides are sewn, we are going to have a look at the bottom bit now, and we need to mark a line roughly 5 inches long and definitely 3/8 of an inch in from the raw edge. This is the line we are not going to sew. So what I like to do, I'm just going to clip these together, and what I like to do is put little bars here which mean stop sewing. So we're going to sew between here and here and here and here. We're going to back stitch well. These bits here will be a stress point because we're going to turn the bag through using this hole. So nice little back stitch, you know, once or twice is fine. So now we've sewn this, we've left a nice big gap here where the line is. We're going to press this seam open at the sewn parts, but also we're going to continue that along the line that we drew. So I'll press the sewn parts first. And then continue it across the line. Then turn it over and repeat for the other side. And that, pressing open this hole here, is going to make it ever so much easier when you come to join that up later on. So now we've got the bottom looking beautiful, I just need to backtrack a little and remind you to trim your seams that you've sewn at the sides of the lining to 1/4 of an inch. It doesn't have to be a precise 1/4 of an inch, it's just to help the lining fit nicer inside the bag. And then we're going to close these corners in exactly the same way as we did with the exterior. So we put our fingers in, pinch, pull the corners outwards and make sure that the base seam is lined up with the side seam. Clip or pin in place. And we'll also use a 2.5mm stitch length and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And when we've sewn our corners, we'll trim those down to 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Then we can bring in our exterior piece again, and we're going to find the quarter markings around the top of the exterior and the lining. And to do that, we'll use the seams at the sides as one marking, as the halfway marking, and we'll put those together, pull them out. That is 1/4 marking. So we make a little mark here, and we'll do the same using the side seams for the other side. So our quarter markings will be the side seams and the centre of each panel, and we'll repeat that for the exterior. And now we've found our quarter markings, we're going to keep the exterior of the bag so that the right sides are together and the wrong sides are facing outwards. And our lining piece we're going to turn so that the right side is facing outwards and the wrong side is on the inside. Then we'll take the lining piece, the top is this side, and we'll slide it in to the exterior of the bag, and we will have the right sides together and the wrong side of the lining will be the bit that opens up, and we'll put the seams at the side seams of the lining and the exterior together and clip in place, and do that for the other side also. And we'll do that for the quarter markings. On both sides. And then we can pin the rest. Now if you go to place your lining and you discover that the lining is too baggy around the top and it won't fit into the exterior of the bag, it's a common problem among beginner bag makers, and it's fine. It probably means that your seam allowances on the sides of the lining and the exterior of the bag have been inconsistent. It's not usually a great big issue. What I would advise you to do is just take the side seams of the lining in a little bit more, not too much, so that it fits around the exterior of the bag. Certainly for this bag, if you need to make a small adjustment, it won't make a difference to the overall style of the bag. So we can take this to the sewing machine and sew around the top of the bag using a 2.5mm stitch length and a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I like to open or butterfly my seams where I can because it reduces bulk as we sew over the seams. Okay, so we're not going to trim this seam that we've just sewn, we're going to leave that alone. What we're going to do is reach in through the hole in the lining, grab the base of the exterior and pull it through and turn the whole bag through the gap we left in the lining. With our fingers, we're just going to poke out the corners of the exterior. Don't worry too much about the lining corners just now, and we're going to put the lining back inside the bag where it would usually be expected to be found. And then I'm going to take my two fingers and I'm going to put them in the corners of the lining and poke them, pulling the exterior piece a little bit, poke my fingers and poke that lining into the corners of the exterior of the bag, like that. And then when we've done that, we will find a nice little exterior accent panel on the inside of the bag. And we'll do that for the other side. And we need to make sure that this turn measures 2 1/4 inches high. So take your ruler, measure 2 1/4 inches all the way around and clip in place. And if you're wondering what this beautiful little clip bag is, this is my other free pattern, the Ellis storage bag, which I will put a link for in the description box below. And with that clipped in place, when we're happy with the consistency of the height all the way around of this accent piece, we're going to give this a nice little press. Two things to note while we are pressing. First thing is that we want this seam allowance, you can feel it inside, it's naturally tucked towards the bottom of the bag, which is where we want it to go. We don't want it to go upwards, we want to press that downwards. The second thing is, be careful of your tape if you've used a hook and loop tape fastener, because you can melt that with your iron. And if you've used a magnetic snap, be aware that extreme heat, example from an iron, can weaken the magnetic properties of magnetic snaps. With your exterior finished, we're going to start attaching some handles, and we'll do that on the inside of the top of the bag. So we'll move to the side seam, and we're going to make a couple of marks, 4 inches to each side of this side seam. And 4 inches to the other side of the side seam. Okay, side seam, 4 inches, 4 inches. And then repeat that for the remaining side seam. Then we can bring in the handles, and we're going to make marks 1.5 inches in from each of the short ends. I'm going to use chalk because they might be visible, these marks might be visible above the top of the bag. These marks here, nobody's going to see those, so it doesn't really matter what you mark those in, as long as it doesn't bleed through the bag, obviously. So now we can position our handles onto the bag using these marks that we've made to the side of each of the side seams. So we're going to position it so that our line on the strap is level with the top of the bag, and we are not going to lie it flat, we're going to put it so it's standing on its side, and it's going to be standing on this line, directly on this line. And then we're going to fold up each side, the exterior of the bag, so that this side of the strap of the handle is directly in the crease of the fold. And then we're going to clip that in place. Make sure that the top of the back and the front of the bag are level. All right. And then we're going to make some more lines, and for this you definitely want an erasable marking tool that won't leave any bleach marks or any other marks on your fabric, because this will be visible at the end. I'm using a Choco pen actually by Clover, and we'll make our mark 1/4 inch in vertically from this fold of the bag, and then we'll also, just feeling where our handle comes to, the edge of our handle, we'll make a mark 1/4 inch in from there also. And we'll make a mark 1/4 inch down from the top, and 1.25 inch down from the top. So that when you've done that, you're going to be left with a nice little rectangle. And we're going to take this to the machine. We're going to top stitch at your preferred top stitch length directly on top of the chalk mark. And then we will do exactly the same for the mark that we've made on the same side of the bag, so to the other side of the fastener. Make sure at every step that you are not twisting your handles when you're putting them on. It's so easily done, whether you're experienced or beginning. So now we've got one of the handles attached to one side of the bag, and we'll repeat that for the second side. So now you've sewn your own moonstone, I know it's probably not going to be the last, but I'd love to see it. So tag us in all the usual places on social media at Scandinotions. Come along to the Scandinotions Creative Sewing Group on Facebook if you want to continue the chat. We'd love to see you there. It's a free, inclusive sewing community. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and or like the video.